What up, all my fellow crafty peeps? Hi, my name is Judy, and if you haven't been to my channel before, I do sewing DIYs and sewing tutorials and sew whatever I feel like sewing. So for this week, I decided to, since I'm making a ton of face masks for myself, since I'm going back to work when school starts, pray for me, and for other people who in my family who requested it and people who want to buy it, I figured I'd make a video showing you guys how to make one yourself. So let's get started.
Okay, so obviously before you start making face masks, you have to cut out your pieces. So for each of the masks, I cut out 4 pieces. I cut out the 2 outer pieces and the 2 inner pieces. And I have a pattern template that I use, you can see me tracing it there, that I will link in the description box where you can get that. It doesn't have a seam allowance included on it, so you have to add the seam allowance, so that's why I traced it first, and then I'm using the ruler to draw again. So cutting out a ton of fabric because I was making 5 masks for my nephew, for if he was going to go back to school, which I think he's going to do online school, but it doesn't hurt to have a bunch of masks. Also, YouTube, pretty please don't flag my video for copyright infringement for watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine in the video. Cutting fabric is boring. I'm sorry. Okay, so the first thing you do is you pin your pieces together. So like those are 2 outer pieces, 2 inner pieces. You're pinning them right sides together, and then you're sewing along the curved edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that'll be the part that's going to go over your nose and your mouth when they join together. I'm doing that for all 10 pieces. Alright, so what I'm doing here, it's kind of hard to see, my bad. I cut little notches in the curved edge of the fabric where I sewed, not over the thread but right at the end of it. And I'm pressing it against the iron to flatten the seams, so that way the pieces will lie together better when I pin them together and sew the fronts and the backs of the masks together. Okay, so now to pin the pieces together. So how I do this is I line up the center seams of my front and my back piece, or my inner and outer pieces, and pin it right at the very top where they join together and right at the very bottom where they meet together. And then I pin along the rest of the top and the rest of the bottom, trying to make sure it's nice and evenly spaced out. And now that I have all my mask pieces together, I'm going along and I'm sewing along the bottom side of each mask at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm sewing along the top part around the curve at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm doing this on all 5 masks that I've been making. And then once again, the pieces of these masks, the right sides are together, so that's why you can see the cut seams from where I already sewed the curved edges. Also, make sure you're just sewing along the top and the bottoms of the mask. Do not sew the sides yet, because if you do that, then you won't be able to attach your elastic later, and then you can't wear the dang mask. So now that my masks are sewn and they're flipped inside out, I like to press them flat with the iron just to make sure the seams are pushed all the way out, and that way everything, you have as much covering as you possibly can, because I'm going to go back over this and top stitch it later. Also, it's kind of hard to see, so I tried to slow it down a little bit. That's what I get for using time-lapse on my phone. But also what I'm doing when I'm ironing this flat is I'm tucking in the end pieces with the raw edges that I didn't sew. I'm tucking them in about a 1/4 inch and ironing them flat, because then you're going to tuck in your elastic in between that later and then sew it all down, so that way it's nice and clean, there's no raw edges, nothing like that. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm getting my elastic for the masks. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic, and I'm cutting out 7-inch long pieces. So I'm going to have 10 pieces total, 2 per mask. And then I'm going to go ahead and pin it into the mask. So typically, when I pin these in, I do it, try to scooch it in about a 1/4 inch at most, so that way there's as much elastic room as possible. You can tie it off if you need to make it smaller. If not, it fits. My nephew's, I'm making it, scooching it a little bit more just because he's got a smaller head. But, you know, it's whatever your preference is, you do you. And now that my elastic is pinned in, I like to go over it at 1/8 inch seam allowance a couple times, back and forth, just to make sure it's nice and secure in the mask. So I do that for all 4 pieces or 4 ends of elastic, trim the threads, and then I'm going to go over the entire edge of the mask on all 4 sides at 1/8 inch, just to make it nice and flat, to make it look nice and neat. And the very last thing I like to do is just iron it nice and flat, make it nice and crisp and look pretty before I'm done with it. And here are the masks that I made for my nephew. And here are a ton of masks that I have made myself over the past few weeks.
So hopefully you enjoyed that video. Hopefully you found it informational and helpful, and you're gonna go out and make your own mask or buy a mask from somebody else. But please, there's no excuse not to be wearing a mask. Do your part, okay? Because I want to be safe when I go back to work. But like always, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure you come back next week to see what I feel like sewing then. Bye!